Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome back, everyone, to another broadcast of In the Trenches. I'm really excited to have on today's call Grant Baldwin, who is the founder of The Speaker Lab, which you can find at thespeakerlab.com, and is somebody who I met last fall at a Danny Innie event where we hit it off immediately. And he actually essentially teaches how to get booked and paid to speak, and he's kind of one of those people where you find on a particular subject, in this case speaking, who's just like an authority, an expert on it. And so he's essentially my go-to guy on learning how to get speaking gigs. And so I want to bring him on today to talk about how to do that. Like, what's the process? How does he do it? And how he's built his platform around that. So Grant, thanks so much for being on the call with us today.
It is an honor and delight to hang out with someone quite like yourself, Tom, who has lived in Nashville, who will inevitably eventually be moving back to Nashville, even if you don't realize it yet. But you're a good dude, and I'm looking forward to you living back here in Nashville.
Awesome. I love it. Every time we have this conversation, you bring up the Nashville connection, which I love.
I'm relentless on it.
It's awesome. It is definitely one of my favorite cities in the world for sure. So we'll see if we can end up back there. But right now I'm in sunny but cold Aspen, Colorado area. So it'll be a bit of a change.
We live in our own little utopia out here. So it's just the weather's perfect year round. It never snows, no problems, no ice. But yeah, you just stay out there in the cold and let me know how that goes for you.
Fair. So hey, let's before we hop into the Speaker Lab and what you're doing with that, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into speaking itself.
Yeah, so I actually, in high school, I was really involved in my local church, and my youth pastor really had a big impact on my life. It was a great speaker as well, and so that's really kind of what I wanted to do. And so I went to Bible college, was a youth pastor at a local church for a little while, so got a lot of opportunities to speak doing that. I just really, really enjoyed it. Like, speaking is one of those things, it's just a lot of fun. And so after I finished up that position there, I was kind of looking around trying to figure out what I wanted to do with life. And I knew one thing I really enjoyed was speaking. I met a couple guys who were speakers and was just trying to figure out, like, is this a career option? Is this a thing that you could actually do? Like, I didn't see this anywhere on the menu so I'm not really sure, like, how do you actually go about getting into it? And I think that's where a lot of people are, of going, like, I spoke a handful of times, but I'm not really sure what to do next. Like, I feel like it went well. I want to do this more. I would love to get paid to do it. But, like, now what? Do I just sit back and wait for the phone to ring? And what are those next steps I take? So found a couple people who were speaking at the types of events I wanted to speak at. And so just kind of learned from them, like built relationships with them. Kind of figured out what I wanted to talk about, who I wanted to talk to, and just kind of figured a bit of that out over time. And so that's kind of how we got started. So that was probably 8-9 years ago or so. And at this point, I've spoken at 450 different paid speaking engagements. We've spoke to close to 500,000 people live, and 45 different states right now in the U.S. And so, yeah, speaking is just a lot of fun. And, we've definitely learned a couple things along the way.
That's awesome. What was the biggest event you've ever spoken at? How many people?
13,000. I did a keynote for a couple years ago, which was just a crazy, surreal experience. So I've been fortunate in that I've been able to speak at several events that are several thousand people. And so it's just, but that one was 13,000. Had one a couple years ago that was 8,000. So you have these big arenas where people are just staring at screens, really. So it's very funny to me because in a room that size, you have basically the front row is looking at you, but everybody else is watching you on a screen. And even the front row, like, you're right there, but you still see them looking at the screens on the, on the side of the stage there. So it's kind of it's just a fun environment.
How does that, real quick, before we dig into this stuff, I'm just curious, how does that change the dynamic for you as a speaker when you go in front of these huge audiences versus maybe smaller audiences? Yeah,
that's a great question. I think two things. One is, because everybody's looking at a screen, you actually try to spend more time talking to the camera than you do talking to you're talking talking to the audience, but you have to remember, like, they're all looking through the lens of the camera, so I'll continue to talk to the audience, just knowing that there are, in some cases, thousands of people out there. And a lot of times the way the lighting is, you can't really see past the first few rows. You're just kind of trusting people are out there. But a lot of times when I get to like a really key point or something I really want to hammer home, a lot of times I'll try to just look into the camera to make that point, because I know that's what people are watching at that point. And so that's a really key point. The other thing too that I've noticed is that all your motions, your gestures, your pause, everything has to be bigger. And so the way you and I would just hang out, if we're at lunch hanging out, the way you and I would talk to each other is very, very different than how you would speak to a group of 10 people. And the group of 10 people is very different than how you'd speak to a group of 1,000 people. And so it kind of just multiplies up there in terms of your motions, your gestures, your how you move your voice around, your how you move and use the stage. A lot of times the stages in that type of setting are just massive. And so figuring out how you want to use that stage, how much of the stage you want to use. So everything's just kind of amplified and multiplied up. You also have to consider too, in terms of, like, I use a lot of humor, I use a lot of comedy and stories. So you have to kind of factor in allowing the room to get the joke and to laugh. And so laughter can be very contagious, and it can kind of spread through a room a little bit. And so where in a group of, let's say 50, you tell a joke, everybody laughs for a second or two. Joke ends, laughter ends, you move on. In a big room, like, the laughter may not die down for several seconds. And so you want to kind of allow that moment to hang there. Otherwise, you're kind of trying to speak over the laughter and kind of jump over the joke. And so you got to factor in that as well. So, just fun little like nuances there that make it slightly different.
Yeah, obviously nothing to consider for the person who's just getting started, I would assume, but it's fascinating to hear anyway, because I'm just curious about that. But let's take this back maybe to kind of the beginner level stuff, and when you got your start, how do you, like, will you speak on anything? Will you present on anything? Or do you, in your case in particular, and then kind of what you suggest other people do, or do you find some sort of niche or something like that? Like, how do you actually go about doing this to get your first kind of paid speaking gig? Yeah,
I think it's a bit of both, especially in the beginning. You're trying to figure out not only that balance of what you want to speak about, but what people are willing to pay you for. Assuming, like, that's the primary purpose is you want to speak to get paid. And so you want to try to figure that out a little bit of what, just because, like, if I'm the best possible speaker to speak about underwater basket weaving, it doesn't, that's great, but doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to pay me for it. So trying to figure that out a little bit of what people are willing to pay for, and then also figuring out what you like to speak about, what you're knowledgeable on, and then what resonates with an audience and what you feel like. There's some things I'm pretty knowledgeable on, but I'd probably suck as a speaker on those things because they're not super interesting topics or maybe something along those lines. So there's definitely that balance there. So one of the things I always tell people is in the beginning when you're getting started, is you can start broad, meaning that I speak about a couple of different topics and subjects, but the goal is that over time you start to narrow that down, so you know that I am the best possible speaker on X, and I am the go-to person on X, rather than trying to be this generalist who is all things for all people. But a lot of it in the beginning, you're just trying to get at bats. You're trying to get better as a speaker. You're trying to be seen more. You're trying to improve as a speaker. You're trying to build those relationships. And so you may need a little bit more flexibility to kind of figure out what it is that you want to speak about. But having said that, if you have the opportunity to speak, I think you have to do more than just say, well, I can speak about anything. Tom, what do you want me to speak on? But being able to say, hey, here's like 4 or 5 different topics, that I could speak. If you want me to talk about, book marketing, if you want me to talk about blogging, if you want me to talk about productivity, if you want me to, just depending on the nature of the event, you may have some broad topics that you could speak about. But the goal is that long term, you'd be able to say, no, I'm the best person to speak about book marketing, like in your case. So just figuring out what that topic is. And again, some of that just takes practice, and some of that takes some time to figure out what works well with the audience and what works well with you.
And I guess another part of that too, if you want to get paid for it, kind of what topics pay, or is that not necessarily the case? I don't know. You tell me.
No, it is the case because, and so there are three key questions I tell speakers to answer is, first of all, number one, why do you want to speak? Why is it that you want to speak? Number two, who do you want to speak to? Number three, what do you want to talk about? So that why question is really important because if your primary purpose for speaking is to get paid, then that, and in some ways it a little bit dictates and determines your answers to the who and the what questions. Again, going back to the example of if I'm the best speaker in the world at underwater basket weaving, and that's what I know the who and I know the what of what I want to talk about, but the why is that I want to get paid. Well, it's going to be a really hard market to speak on those things and to get paid. Let's talk about, we can talk a little bit about the getting paid aspect of it, because I think there's a bit of a misconception here that a lot of people say, okay, I want to get paid as a speaker, meaning that I want to go speak and I want them to hand me a check at end of transaction. But I always try to help speakers realize that there's a lot of ways to get paid beyond just speaking on that stage for that small period of time. So I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, I spoke at a conference, and I went there and I did a free workshop at this conference. And so they didn't pay for my travel. So it cost me money out of pocket to go and to speak at this event. So on paper, you might look at that event and say, oh, well, you didn't make anything speaking at that. You spoke for free. Or in fact, you lost money by going to speak at that event. But as a result of just speaking at that small workshop, I picked up, I think, one or two coaching clients. I had a couple people that were in that workshop that later joined one of our courses. And then I also built a good relationship with that client to the point that they hired me the next year to keynote that event. And so even though I went and I spoke at that workshop and did that for free, that one free event led to, close to $10,000 in revenue. And so I think it's easy for, again, a speaker to look at it and be like, wow, you didn't get paid. And, I want to be a paid speaker. But in reality, I was a really well-paid speaker for that one free event. So begin to look beyond just and again, there's nothing wrong with getting paid for it. And absolutely, when possible, try to get paid for it. But also look to figure out how can you leverage that speaking opportunity for other ways that you can generate generate revenue for your business.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's a kind of a brilliant way to look at it. So I guess moving on from the paid, and I'm sure I'll come back to that in a bit. How do you actually seek out, how do you find these opportunities? And I'm sure eventually they come to you. So I'm sure, Grant, you obviously get a ton of requests now. But when you're just starting out, how do you actually find the right events?
Yeah, you're right. And that the longer you speak, the easier it is to find bookings because you've built a lot of relationships. You've built hopefully some referrals, some repeat business, that kind of stuff. But a lot of this in the beginning is guerrilla marketing, meaning that you are, once you're really clear on who you want to speak to and what you want to speak about, then it's kind of a matter of figuring out, well, where do those people gather? What are the conferences? What are the events where those people hang out at? And how could I go speak at that type of conference? So, for example, let's say for you, Tom, you want to speak about book marketing. Okay. So who should we speak to on something like probably authors? Well, the next thing I would do then is I would start to figure out where do authors gather, both published, self-published. There's a lot of people that are authors, a lot of people that want to be authors, a lot of other people that are writers that want to promote their work. Where would those people gather? So what I found is the simplest place to start is just going to Google. And so I would go into Google and I would look up something like author conference, publishing conference, author association, author convention. You could look this up by state as well. Colorado author conference, Tennessee author conference. And the point here is I'm looking for specific types of events that are looking for speakers that talk about the subject or topic that I'm interested in. So if I, for example, use Tom, let's say about book marketing to authors, and let's say that Grant host a conference for authors, and you come to me and say, hey, I'm a speaker and I speak about book marketing for authors. I would love to see if I could come to a workshop or a session for you. That totally aligns with what I'm looking for. I've got a group of authors coming to my event, so why wouldn't I want to have a conversation with you? Why wouldn't I consider bringing you to my event? But again, that comes down to you as the speaker being really, really specific on the what and the who. Otherwise, if you say, hey, I want to be a book marketing speaker, but I'm going to just anybody I'm going to this car conference, or I'm going to this knitting conference, and I'm saying, hey, I speak about book marketing. Are you interested? no, I'm not interested. Like, that doesn't align with what our audience is looking for. But if I'm speaking about the topics that audience is interested in, then yeah, it makes total sense, and it seems like it'd be a really good fit. So that's a lot of it in the beginning. And in fact, you and I were going to be co-hosting a workshop here soon, which I think we'll talk a little bit about in a bit, where we'll go into this a lot more in depth. So I found that Google is one of the best ways, and there's a lot of ways to find speaking engagements that are out there that hire speakers, that bring in speakers, that pay speakers. So we're just scratching the surface right now for what we're going to talk about on that workshop.
Yeah, and real quick, for those who are interested, and if you want to get paid to speak, or if you want to do any speaking, even if it's not to get paid, you just want to get in front of an audience or whatever it is, spread your message, you should definitely head over to tommorkes.com/grant, GRANT, and that'll be a splash page where you can sign up and get access to the workshop that Grant's going to be hosting here shortly. So head over there and sign up if you want to learn kind of more in depth when we really deep dive into this topic. And I'm pretty sure, Grant, you'll be hosting kind of a Q&A session at the end of that presentation. Yeah,
so we're going to be doing a lot of like just live training and teaching, really going way in depth on the subject and topic. And then we are going to be doing, we're going to be hanging out doing just live Q&A, you and I. So, and the nice thing too is, I know a lot of your audience is interested in writing and publishing and having a book. And so a lot of these things go hand in hand. And so in fact, I have a self-published book that we've sold over 30,000 physical copies of, like physical copies, not PDFs, not Kindle versions, but actual physical copies. And I would say that, 95% of those sales, have come as a direct result of my speaking, meaning I went and spoke somewhere, somebody liked it, and they come to the back of the room and they'll buy a book for $10. Or I may go speak at a conference and oh, you have a book. We'd like to order a copy for every one of our attendees, like just a couple days ago, for example, I spoke at Iowa State University, and I go speak there every January and August for their freshman orientations. And so in January, they have about 300, 400 incoming freshmen, and they buy a copy of my book for every one of those students. So not only is it a great tool to help students beyond the speech and the presentation, but it's also a huge revenue generator for me that I go speak, and they're going to pay me one fee, and then they're going to buy a book for 300, 400 people, and that's another price on top of that. So I more or less doubled what I was able to generate in revenue because I had a book that I was able to use in conjunction with my speaking. So
I love that.
Yeah, speaking and books go really, really well hand in hand.
Yeah, some of the authors that we publish, actually, that's kind of been our biggest source of sales. And it obviously, there's the certain context of, depends on what the book is and so on and so forth. Sure. But those that can be geared towards colleges, man, I'll tell you what, like, a little asterisk to your note for those who are listening, if you're publishing to that market, if at all, it can be very lucrative if you can tie in speaking. So when our authors get a speaking engagement and they order bulk, like you said, hundreds of books, those are really nice paydays, and a great way to. And again, it's one of those things that if you're an author or you're going to write and publish a book, it does go hand in hand, I think. So if you're a speaker, I think you benefit by having a book. And you can say, here's my business card, so to speak, and vice versa, that if you have a great book, getting on the stage will help you spread the message of that book further. So I think that's a great combo.
Well, and to tie into something you said earlier there, that as long as the book fits with the audience, and so that's why it's so important for you to get also really clear on what it is that you speak about. So it's not what do you speak about? Well, I can talk to anybody about anything. Well, what's your book about? Well, it's for everybody. Well, no, you want to know that when someone comes and hears you speak, that oh yeah, by the way, I do have this follow-up resource or tool, this book, this curriculum, whatever it may be, that fits perfectly with what it is that I just talked about, or what it is that I just taught you.
That's awesome. Real quick, I'm just curious, what's the book that you, for when you go to speak at these colleges that people are buying in bulk?
Yeah, so I have a book called Reality Check, and it's a book for high school and college students. So it's really about how to make that transition from high school into college. So it's 50 short chapters, 4 or 5 page chapters. Each chapter answers a different question. So things like, should I go to college? How am I going to pay for college? What classes do I take? What do I major in? Job interviews, resumes, internships, credit cards, taxes, budgets, just like life 101 type stuff. And so that's why most people don't, most of my entrepreneur friends don't know that I have a book. Why? Because it's not for them, right? It's for 17 and 18 and 19 year olds. So if I go speak at a high school or college, I'm going to talk about the book. But whenever I'm talking to my 20 something or 30 something, 40 something entrepreneur friends, that they don't know I have a book because it's not for them. So making sure that the book aligns with the audience that you're speaking to.
Powerful. I love that. And again, take for the listeners out there, I think there's some important lessons to take from that, but just like hone in on the fact that this book, and this speaking engagement, like it sounds like Grant obviously put time and effort into thinking about this. It was methodical. That's a particular book for a particular audience. It's a particular stage that he's getting on, and I think that's really important. And I'm taking notes here for myself because I think this year I'd probably like to do a few speaking engagements. So I'm thinking to myself, who's the audience I want to get in front of? How do I find them? How do I reach out? And then is there a book that I can actually use as kind of a calling card there too, and potentially get some bulk orders from? So all those kind of good, challenging questions. So here's a question for you, Grant. In terms of seeking it out, I can see like kind of just pitching potential conferences and events and so on and so forth, which I'm very comfortable doing. And I think anybody who's not, just kind of get over yourself and just go for it. Trust me, the worst they can say is no. How about like I've been presented recently by, I won't name names or who the company is. I'm not quite sure of their operation, but it was one of those things where I got an invitation to speak at some event where they're going to basically bring in like 200 or 300 people. They're already selling tickets. I obviously need to get more details about what the conference actually is, but are there things to watch out for, like that I wouldn't be aware of, just like getting an offer like that initially? Like, is there anything to watch out for when people like try to get you to speak? Does that make sense?
So if they're reaching out to you and they're acting like they don't have a budget?
Well, no, I haven't gotten that far yet, but I looked at the website and it looked like maybe a service that like brings in speakers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what they're gonna present, but I'm just curious if there are. And this is not necessarily this might be totally above board, but I'm curious. But it made me think. Wait a second, is there anything I should watch out for if somebody like asked me to speak or what? Like, what is the information I need to know? And what are there any pitfalls or any things to watch out for? So
if someone just reaches out to you and they're asking you to come speak, what you should just be looking for, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, most people that are going to reach out, it's going to be legit type of stuff. But I'm like, it's always good. Like if you have no context at all of what this is, then it's always worthwhile to do your due diligence. Not necessarily from like this is probably a scam, but it's more of, if I'm going to be considered for this conference, and a lot of times conference planners may be looking at a couple different speakers. Like I really want to know what it is that audience is about and what it is that they're looking for, to make sure that I'm tailoring my presentation or my pitch to them in such a way that it makes sense. So even though I may, like, the topic and the content of what I may speak about may not change that much, but I want to make sure that I tweak it a little bit for the context of who I'm speaking to. Meaning, for example, if I speak about let's just say customer service, okay? I can speak about customer service to a group of authors, but I could also speak about customer service to, let's say, a group of dentists. So even though it's different context of who I'm speaking to, the content could stay pretty much the same. But I want to talk about, okay, hey, whenever your new patients come into your office, let's talk about some different ways that we can apply customer service to that specific situation. So something like that. I just want to be familiar with their context and maybe some of their lingo, so I can make sure that I'm applying it to them whenever I'm even just talking to the decision maker up front. Yeah.
Okay. So we're coming up to the top of the conversation. I know I've taken your time for long enough at this point, but I've got a couple of kind of, I think, relevant closing questions, so to speak. Would you, when you're doing this stuff, you're doing these presentations, are you big on having the slides and being line by line prepared? What's your level of preparation before an event?
Yeah, well, a couple questions there. So let's talk about the preparation, then let's talk about the slides part of it.
Okay.
So the preparation, it's like, I think sometimes there's this misconception that good speakers just get up there and they just wing it. Okay, they don't. All right, little trick of the trade. Good speakers spend a lot of time practicing, preparing, rehearsing, just going over their material, so that by the time they get up there, it's not like necessarily like I never want to, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll try to like manuscript out a talk, and I never want to memorize it verbatim. It's not like, if you're memorizing the lyrics to a song, you need to know every lyric verbatim, right? But if you're telling a story, you can get the spirit of the story and the gist of the story, but may change how the story is told. So that's really what I want to do, is I want to know where I'm going in a conversation, but I don't want to be so deep inside of my head that everything has to be said this exact perfectly scripted way. Like I think there's times times where, like any of us, we have listened to speakers and it's very, very scripted. It feels very like they're just so deep in their own head. They're just not with the audience at all. So whenever I get up and speak, I want to make sure that I've spent, oftentimes hours preparing, rehearsing, pacing the office, my office or a hotel room, just talking to myself, literally spending time just talking to myself, going over the material, making sure that not that it's verbatim, not that it's word for word, but I just know where I'm going with the presentation. Now let's talk about the slide part of it. I personally don't use slides. Slides can work really, really well, but I believe, and one of the things that we teach people is that if you're going to use slides, PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever, they need to be an enhancement to your presentation and not a replacement of your presentation. Because there's a lot of times where speakers will get up there and they're reading off the slides, and it's just, a ton of bullet points, a ton of text. It's really, really heavy. And it's like, well, I mean, if you're just going to show us slides and just read them, like, we don't need you, So if you think of it this way, if you got up and you're getting ready to speak and your slides go down and their technology malfunctions and it just doesn't work, is your talk still solid? Can your talk still stand on its own? And if it can't, then you're not ready yet. So it should be an enhancement, not a replacement to your presentation. So I think slides are great, and I know a lot of speakers use them really, really effectively. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's a lot of little glitches, a lot of little nuances that can happen with technology. So even though I know they can be an enhancement, I'd rather my talk stand on its own as being a good presentation.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. And then I guess finally, any key kind of bits of information? I know we'll dive deeper into this during the live workshop. So guys, if you're interested in a live workshop, go to tommorkus.com/grant, and we'll be able to go into this way more depth, which I'm really excited for. But any closing kind of comments or thoughts, in particular, like maybe, what makes a good presentation? Like what makes a successful speaker?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is that the more often you speak, the better you become. And so for a lot of people, maybe you spoke once or twice, it was a lot of fun, and you're like, okay, how do I get better? I think the way that you get better is that you just continue to do it. So I mean, we can talk about it all day long in terms of the art of speaking, but you learn by actually doing it. Meaning that I've got 3 little daughters, and so if I was trying to teach one of my girls to ride her bike, we could watch YouTube videos, we could read blog posts. I mean, we could look at manuals about how to ride a bike, but how do you learn to ride a bike? You get on the freaking bike and you ride it, So as a speaker, there's going to be times where you speak and it just doesn't go well. That's okay. It's going to happen to everyone. I've had times where I've bombed. So you become a better speaker by actually speaking, and you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then I also think just having a long-term perspective on the business, knowing that one talk that you did, it won't be the first talk, it won't be the last talk. And so you can always continue to refine it, to improve, to get better at what it is that you do as a speaker.
Love it. Grant, thanks so much. And then where can people reach out to find out more about you and your work and learn from you on this subject? Yeah,
so everything that we do right now is over at thespeakerlab.com. And then we have a podcast over there as well, the Speaker Lab podcast, where we interview speakers. We do a lot of listener Q&A, do some teaching and training. So you can check out all that over there. We've got a free email course people can check out to help you get started as a speaker. But I think the best thing is definitely, Tom, you've talked about it a few times with that, this free workshop that we're going to be doing on February the 2nd. It's going to be a awesome time. I'm really, really looking forward to this, but be teaching and training all about how to get started as a speaker. Plus, like you said, doing a lot of just Q&A and answering any questions live that people have about this. So definitely register for that over at what was the URL? tommorkus.com/grant. So
correct.
Make sure people stop by and check that out for sure.
Definitely. We'll make sure it's linked up with the show notes, and I'll be pushing people your way to have this conversation because I want to dive more in depth on this and hijack more of your time. So I appreciate it, Grant. Thank you so much for being on the call.
You bet, buddy.
And that wraps up another broadcast of In the Trenches. If you'd like to check out the show notes, just head over to tommorkus.com/podcast, where you'll find the latest broadcast. And if you enjoyed today's broadcast, please do me a favor and leave a rating and review on iTunes. That's the fastest, simplest, easiest way to support my creative work, and it would really mean a lot to me. As always, this is Tom Morkus, and if you're listening to this, you are the resistance.